It's strange how silence can feel alive. I remember walking along the edge of the old forest behind my neighborhood, the fog curling low over the damp grass, carrying a faint hum of streetlights that flickered as if unsure they wanted to be there. The air smelled like wet pine and old earth, a quiet heaviness pressing against my chest. Shadows moved in periphery. Not quite trees, not quite something alive. But every time I blinked, they were gone. Somewhere beyond the mist, a door creaked, soft and deliberate, though the house had been empty for years. My footsteps slowed, the world narrowing until all I could hear was my own breath, shallow and hesitant. I thought I was alone. I wasn't. There was something waiting, just beyond a thin veil of light, watching, patient, almost curious. And then, in the pale flicker of a distant lamp, I saw it. The shape, darker than the night, gliding silently toward me. That's when I realized some things are not meant to be seen, and even the smallest shadow can hold a lifetime of secrets. The night was thick with fog. It rolled low over the street, curling around the corners of houses. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of my bedroom window. Outside, the streetlight flickered, a dull, hesitant rhythm. At first, I thought it was nothing, just old wiring, tired and unstable. But then the shadow moved. It was there, beneath the pale glow, tall, thin, almost too long, too wrong, like it had been stretched across the pavement. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Small clouds in the chill air of my room. The shadow mirrored me, step for step, posture for posture. A rustle of leaves drifted past, scratching against the curb. The fog thickened, swallowing the house across the street. I could no longer see the front door, only that shadow, watching, waiting. I blinked. It twitched like a reflection imperfect in water. The streetlight flickered again, longer this time, leaving patches of darkness. And every time it dimmed, the shadow shifted closer, or maybe it only seemed so. The hum of distant traffic murmured through the mist. I could feel it in my chest, a vibration that made my skin tingle. My ears ache with quiet tension. I wanted to look away. I wanted to move. But my legs stayed still, heavy as wet wool. Even my hands trembled against the cold glass. The shadow lifted an arm, just slightly, a mirror of my own twitch. I swallowed. There was no warmth in the night, no safe sound. The fog thickened further. It rolled over the empty street, curling around the light, softening the edges of the world. The house across the road disappeared completely. The shadow remained, its shape flickering with the lamp. I noticed details I hadn't before. It wasn't just thin, it was skeletal, too sharp at the joints, elbows bending in ways that hurt my eyes. Its face, I never saw a face, only a suggestion of emptiness, a pale absence in the dark. A single leaf fell. It landed on the curb with a soft tap. I flinched. The shadow tilted its head, almost curious, or mocking. I drew in a breath. Cold air filled my lungs, stinging and sharp. The hum of electricity in the streetlight buzzed against my ears. Fingers pressed against the window pane, leaving tiny prints that fogged in the chill. It was waiting. I didn't know what exactly. Waiting for me to look away. Waiting for me to move. The light flickered again. This time, the shadow twisted. Almost impossible. A fluid motion that made my chest tighten. I realized I had been holding my breath, exhaling slowly, quietly, as if even that small movement might betray me. The street emptied. Even the wind seemed to pause. Only the faint hum of the lamp and the breathing of the night. Then the shadow didn't move. It stood still and silent, just beneath the flickering light. A pale, impossible figure framed in darkness and fog. I stayed at the window, watching it, as the fog rolled on, as the night held its quiet, restless breath. I didn't sleep that night, and in the morning the streetlight was steady, the shadow gone, but I still hear it sometimes in the flicker of lights, a soft echo beneath the hum of the night, waiting. The house was quiet, too quiet. Night pressed against the windows. The chill seeped in through the floorboards. Above me, the attic whispered. Soft thuds, heavy, deliberate. At first, I thought it was the house settling, old with stretching, but the pacing didn't match. It was regular, intentional, I pressed my ear to the ceiling. Each step echoed like a heartbeat in the dark. A low hum of air, dust, and silence lingered in the corners of the room. Sometimes I thought I heard whispers, just beyond comprehension. A breath of sound curling around the rafters. Always there, never close enough to catch. I avoided the attic door. Locked for years, forgotten, but the thuds didn't care. They persisted. I could feel it through the floor, a vibration in the wood, a pressure in the air that made my skin crawl. My fingers brushed the cool edge of the doorframe. I pulled back. Cold sweat prickled my neck. The house smelled different near the stairs. Dust mixed with something older, metallic, faint decay, or maybe just the attic waiting. Some nights, I imagined footsteps circling overhead, stopping, pausing, listening. I couldn't sleep. The ceiling seemed too close. The shadows of my room stretched long, crawling along the walls. Even my blanket felt heavy. Finally, I turned the key. The lock resisted. A shiver ran up my spine. And then a click. The door eased open. The attic waited. Empty. Just boxes, dust, and the pale glow from the small window. Nothing should have been wrong. But the air pressed against me. Dense. Expectant. I stepped inside. Wood groaned under my weight. Every breath felt thick. Every inhale tasted of dust and something faintly coppery. I looked around. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. And yet it was alive. The silence held a weight I couldn't name. The thuds had stopped. Or maybe they had just moved beyond hearing. My chest tightened. Every nerve hummed. A box shifted slightly. I hadn't touched it. The edges of the room seemed wrong. Angles too sharp. Shadows too deep. I thought I saw something flicker at the edge of the window. A figure? Or my imagination stretched thin by fear. Either way, it made the hair on my arm stand straight. I didn't linger. The attic smelled of waiting. And something else. Cold, patient. The door closed behind me with a soft, final thud. And for a moment, silence. But when I lay back in bed, I could still feel above me. A presence in the rafters. A breath in the floorboards. A rhythm that would not stop. I told myself it was nothing. Just the house. Just the night. But sometimes, just before sleep, I swear I hear soft footsteps. Pacing. Waiting. The street was quiet. Autumn fog rolled low, curling around the edges of the sidewalks. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves and cold earth. Mrs. Larkin's house had always been still. Windows dark, curtains drawn. Even the garden seemed frozen, leaves pressed against one another. But one evening I saw it, a silhouette, pale, shifting behind the curtain. A figure, small and still, staring into the street. I paused, breath shallow. The fog drifted closer, swallowing the corners of the house. I thought I imagined it at first. The next morning, the house was different. Empty, windows gaping. The garden overgrown, leaves curling, dry and brittle. It had been abandoned for years, or so it seemed. And yet, that night, the light flickered again. A faint pulse through the upper window, soft, hesitant, almost like the house itself was breathing. The silhouette returned, still and silent, watching, waiting. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, shadows bending in the fog, a reflection from my own window. But the shape, it mirrored nothing in my world. It moved with intention. The street was empty, only the hum of distant traffic, muffled by the fog. The air pressed against my skin, heavy with damp. I could smell the faint, metallic scent of decay, maybe old wood, maybe something else. Night after night, it was the same. Light flickering, a shadow in the same window. No one entered. No one left. I walked past once, close enough to see the curtains flutter slightly. The silhouette remained, watching, and for a moment, I felt it look at me, a presence pressing through the glass, through the fog, through the silence. I wondered about Mrs. Larkin, where she had gone, and why the house seemed to remember her, or something else that had taken her place. The air smelled colder near the door, metallic and sharp. I hesitated, fingers brushing the peeling paint, and I imagined soft footsteps inside, pacing deliberate. I never entered. The house waited, silent but aware. Some nights, I could swear the shadows shifted. A tilt of the head, a blink I could almost see, a quiet curiosity in its stillness, and then silence again, the fog pressing closer, the streetlight humming low, the world beyond the house fading into mist. I walk past it now with my gaze fixed elsewhere, but sometimes when the wind rustles the leaves, I see it, a flicker in the upper window, and for a heartbeat, I feel the weight of watching eyes. The street moves on. People pass. Dogs bark. Cars hum. But the house remains. Light flickering. Shadow waiting. Silent. And sometimes just before sleep, I imagine the window watching me back. Curious. Patient. Alone. The hallway stretched long under the dim glow of the lamp. Shadows clung to the corners, folding over one another. The walls seemed to breathe, slowly, in and out in the pale light. I stepped forward. The floorboards groaned softly beneath my weight. A chill pressed against my ankles, lingering like the fog outside. Something moved at the edge of my vision. Just a flicker, a twitch. I turned, but there was nothing there. Only the hall, empty, silent, except for my own breath echoing softly against the walls. The shadows shifted again, elongated, unnatural, stretching along the ceiling, down the walls. They twisted as if aware, folding into shapes I couldn't name. I paused. The air smelled faintly of old wood and dust, and something else, cold, metallic, like waiting. I took another step. A soft rustle brushed past me. My skin prickled. The feeling of being followed pressed close. Even when I was alone, the lamp flickered. Shadows leapt, then stilled. A pulse of light and dark, slow and deliberate. I reached for the wall. The paint was cold, rough under my fingertips. The hallway seemed to stretch farther with every heartbeat. Each step echoed, hollow, against the wooden floor. I thought I saw shapes in the corners. Not quite human, not quite still. They vanished when I looked directly, leaving only the sensation of watching, breathing, waiting. The hum of electricity in the lamp filled my ears. I could feel it in my chest, a vibration that made the silence heavier. I stopped, closed my eyes for a moment. The shadows leaned closer. Fingers of darkness brushing along the walls, curling toward me. I opened my eyes. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, and yet the air felt wrong, thick with a presence I couldn't name. The hallway whispered with my footsteps. Or maybe it whispered on its own, a subtle rustling, brushing, almost deliberate. I reached the end. Nothing awaited me. Just the hall behind, stretching endlessly. Shadows still folded, twisted, watching. I turned back. The lamp's light trembled slightly. The shadows shifted again, folding differently, as if they were learning, remembering my steps. I moved slowly, each footstep deliberate, soft, careful. The air smelled of dust, old timber, and the faint tang of something unseen. I paused in the middle, breathed quietly, and felt again the weight of unseen eyes, following, waiting. The hallway remained, shadows folding, stretching, and I walked through them, carrying the memory of being watched. I reached my room, closed the door softly. The hallway stayed behind me, still, silent and patient. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can feel the shadows shift just beyond the edge of the light, breathing, waiting, alone. Rain tapped lightly against the windows. The night was heavy with moisture. Cold air pressed against the walls. The basement door had never squeaked before, not once. But tonight, it whispered as it moved. A cold draft slipped out. Wet soil rust, something older. It curled around my ankles, teasing me forward. I stared at the darkness beyond. Black, unbroken, magnetic. It pulled at my chest. I felt it in my bones. The floor beneath my feet creaked softly. The walls seemed closer than usual. Every shadow pressed against the corners. Alive, I reached for the handle. Cold metal, slippery with moisture, or maybe just my own sweat. I hesitated. The air smelled of rain, of earth, of something waiting. A hum of stillness vibrated through the floor. It was almost inviting. I opened the door. The basement yawned beneath me, dark, silent, and patient. I stepped inside. The draft curled around my shoulders, biting, wet. Every breath tasted of damp wood and rust. The door slammed behind me. On its own, a shock of metal and finality. The lock clicked. I was alone, completely, yet I could feel eyes in the darkness, and a presence that pressed close. The walls seemed to lean inward. The floorboards hummed with tension. Even the air seemed heavier here. I wanted to move. I wanted to step back. But something held me, a pull from the dark. I ran my fingers along the walls. Rough, wet, cold. Every inch carried the memory of the night. The rain outside, the draft curling around my ankles. I felt regret coil in my stomach. A deep, quiet dread that had nothing to do with imagination. Something was here, and I had invited it. The basement seemed endless. Shadows pooled in corners. They moved slightly when I looked away, folding, stretching, shifting just beyond vision. I breathed slowly. Every exhale tasted of metal and wet earth, the hum of the walls, the way of the darkness. It pressed against me with quiet insistence. Time slowed. The rain drummed softly above, but down here it sounded distant, muted, almost as if it were happening somewhere else. I could feel the air moving in silent currents, tracing the edges of the shadows. I took a step forward, then another. The pull grew stronger. I could feel it in my chest, a tug towards something I could not name. I wanted to turn back. The door loomed behind me, silent, unyielding. I didn't. I kept moving. The basement waited, patient, silent, holding its secrets beneath the rain, beneath the floorboards, beneath the walls. And when I finally left, the memory of it lingered, the cold draft, the smell of wet soil and rust, the pull I could never resist. I never opened the door again. But sometimes when the rain falls heavy, I hear it, a soft squeak, almost imperceptible, a whisper in the dark, calling me back. The guest bathroom was cold. Late at night, the air smelled faintly of soap and damp tile. The hum of the faucet dripped slowly. Unevenly, I caught my reflection. At first, it was normal, but then hesitation. My own movements lagged just slightly, a blink out of sync, a twitch I hadn't made. I leaned closer. The mirror's surface seemed thicker, darker, and then I noticed it, a shadowed shape behind me. Shapeless, dark. I spun around. Nothing. Empty bathroom. Only the tile, the faucet, the faint drip. But the mirror, it still watched. The dark shape remained. Patient, silent. The air felt heavier. A quiet pressure against my chest. Cold brushing my shoulders. The chill of something unseen. My breath came slowly, uneven, tasting faintly of metal. I stepped back. The floor tiles were smooth beneath my feet. Polished, cold. Yet the reflection, it didn't move with me. It stayed, lingering, bending shadows around the edges. I leaned closer again. It blinked, and I hadn't. A pause stretched across the space between us. Long, almost waiting. The faucet dripped, the sound sharp against the silence. I felt in my ears, in my chest, a rhythm that made my skin tingle. I reached out. My fingers trembled against the cool glass. The reflection mirrored the movement, but not fully. It hesitated, lagged, then paused again. I stepped away. The dark shape leaned forward slightly, its edges curling into something almost human. But nothing else in the room moved. I could smell the faint dampness of the tiles, the metallic tang of my own fear. And the shadow, it was patient, waiting. I blinked. The shape blinked differently. A small, subtle twitch, like it was breathing through the glass. I swallowed. Cold air caught my throat. The silence pressed closer, wrapping around me. I spun again. The room remained empty. No one there. No one to explain the shadow lingering in the mirror. I stayed still, watching, breathing. The mirror surface pulsed softly, reflecting light, shadow, and impossible shape. The faucet stopped dripping. The hum of the house beyond seemed distant, muted. Only the mirror remained alive. Only the shape behind it, patient, waiting. I stepped back slowly. Each movement measured. The reflection followed, but always slightly behind. Always slightly different. The bathroom smelled colder now, more sterile, The dark shape remained, blinking, shifting, observing. I turned the light off. The room fell into darkness. The mirror glinted faintly in the shadow, and for a heartbeat, I could still feel it, still see it. Alone, yet watched, and sometimes, even in the quiet of day, I see it blink out of sync. The trail behind the house was shrouded in fog. It pressed thick against my skin, cold and damp. It wrapped around my shoulders and hair. Branches snapped underfoot, but the air was still. No wind stirred the trees. I slowed. The forest seemed to lean closer. Shadows pooled between the trunks. The fog swallowed the path ahead. A movement caught my eye. Too fast. Too fluid to be animal. A black shape darted between the trees. I froze. My chest tightened. The forest smelled of wet earth, pine, and decay. Each breath tasted sharp, metallic. It paused, tilting its head, almost curious, silent, still, watching. I stepped back. Twigs cracked beneath my foot. The sound seemed loud against the fog's thick hush. The shape did not flee. I swallowed. Cold air caught in my throat. The forest seemed alive. Every leaf, every shadow, moving subtly around me. The black shape vanished. Just a blink, and it was gone. The fog closed and where it had stood. Empty, silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and irregular. Each breath labored, warm against the chill. The smell of damp wood lingered. I walked slowly, each step careful. The trail seemed longer than before. The trees leaned closer, their trunks like silent sentinels. Twigs snapped again. No wind moved them. Something moved among the branches. Watching, I wanted to turn back, but the pull of the path, the quiet hum of the woods, kept me moving forward. The black shape appeared again, at the corner of my vision, gone when I looked directly. A flicker of dark, fluid motion. The fog thickened. It pressed against my legs, against my face, against my senses. I could feel eyes in the shadows. Not human eyes. Patient, still, studying me. Every step forward made the forest quieter. Even my own footsteps softened. The air smelled damp, earthy, and sharp with tension. I stopped, listened. The rustling came again. Soft, deliberate, just beyond the edge of vision. The black shape tilted its head once more. Curious, patient, then vanished entirely. I exhaled. Cold air hissed through my teeth. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I turned back toward the house. Fog curled around my ankles, slow and heavy. Shadows clung to the edges of the path. Even in retreat, I felt eyes following, watching, silent. Back at the edge of the woods, the trail seemed empty. The fog lifted slightly, but the memory lingered. The rustling, the black shape, the weight of unseen eyes. Even inside the house, I could feel the forest pressing close. Cold, silent, patient, waiting beyond the walls. The kitchen was quiet. Night pressed against the windows, thick and dark. Rain streaked the glass, soft and irregular. A low hum began, faint at first, almost beneath hearing. It vibrated through the floorboards, into my feet, my chest. I froze. The hum grew louder, insistent, filling the room. Every shadow seemed to stretch, twisting toward the light. The fridge door moved, slowly, like invisible hands nudging it open. Cold air spilled out, sharp against my face. A metallic tang clung to the room, mingling with the hum. The kitchen smelled of old wood and electricity, strange and sharp. I stepped closer, my own breathing loud against the silence. The hum pulsed with each heartbeat, deep and steady. Nothing else moved. No footsteps. No wind. No one. The light above flickered. Shadows pooled beneath the cabinets, stretching longer. The hum grew, steady, almost alive. I pressed my palm against the fridge. Cold metal, vibrating faintly through my fingers. The hum carried into my bones. I could feel it in my chest, in my ears. A draft slithered across the floor. Not from the windows. Not from the door. Something unseen moved with purpose. I backed away. The fridge door remained open. The hum filled the room entirely now, an unbroken, insistent vibration that pressed against my skull. I tried to listen beyond it. The house was silent otherwise. No creaks, no whispers, no distant traffic. Only the hum. I reached toward the door. Cold air brushed my fingertips. The hum throbbed against my ribs. Every shadow leaned closer. I exhaled slowly. The fridge stopped moving. The hum lingered, lower now, resonant, patient. A presence in quiet, unseen but insistent. I stayed in the doorway. Hands pressed on my chest, breath shallow, tasting faintly metallic. The kitchen held its silence. The hum fading but never gone. I left the room. The house seemed normal again. Still, every step echoed in the empty halls. And sometimes, late at night, I hear it return, a low hum vibrating through the floorboards. Soft, insistent. And I remember the fridge door, slowly moving as if something was waiting. The street was quiet. Night pressed low, thick with mist. Cold air wrapped around the houses, heavy and still. Across the street, the old house waited. Dark windows, peeling paint, an empty garden. Yet every night, the lights flickered. I watched from my window. A pale glow blinked on, then off. A pattern, almost deliberate, in the silence. Sometimes I thought I saw it. A figure, shadowed, staring back. Eyes fixed on mine. Curious. I blinked. The room was empty. The figure vanished. Only the flicker remained. The fog crept along the lawn, swirling around the cracked walkway. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and rusted metal. I pressed my forehead to the glass. The chill seeped through. My fingers left small prints on the pane. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and for a heartbeat I could feel it watching. Silent, patient, almost aware. The street was empty. No wind, no movement, only the hum of the lamp outside, and the faint rustle of leaves curling in the mist. I imagined the figure tilting its head, studying me, learning, waiting for a blink, a movement, a breath. Every night was the same. Lights blinking, shadows forming, curiosity lingering in the empty house. It didn't move. It didn't leave. Yet somehow it was alive. I stepped back from the window. The cold lingered on my fingers. The house remained, silent, watching. Sometimes I catch in the corner of my eye a flicker, a movement, and I feel it, curious about me, just as I am about it. The street sleeps, fog drifts, and the lights keep blinking, waiting, patient, alone. Morning fog hung low over the yard. The air was damp, heavy, and smelled faintly of wet earth. Each breath tasted cold, metallic, and sharp. I noticed them first on the porch. Footprints pressed into the mud. Fresh, cold, they led from the edge of the forest. Deep, deliberate impressions in the soft earth. None matched my shoes. None matched anyone I knew. I knelt to touch them. The mud was sticky, cool beneath my fingers. A faint smell of wet leaves and decay clung to it. The forest seemed to hum softly behind me. I followed the trail, step by careful step. Branches rustled overhead, though no wind stirred. The fog swallowed the path ahead, curling around tree trunks like smoke. The footprints were precise, almost too perfect. They led deeper into the gray, stretching toward nothing. I slowed. Every step forward felt heavier. The forest pressed closer. The shadows between the trees leaned toward me. I reached for a tree branch. Rough bark under my fingers, wet and cold. The footprints disappeared just beyond it. The fog thickened, opaque, as if swallowing the path whole. I paused. The forest held its breath. No bird, no animal, no movement, just a muffled hum of the fog. I tried to retrace my steps, but the prints were gone, as if the earth had never been pressed. Empty, silent, the cold mud clung to my boots. I could feel it drying slowly. Every breath tasted faintly metallic, like iron and water. The forest remained, waiting. I turned back toward the house. The fog swirled, curling around my legs. Shadows stretched along the trunks, leaning toward me, patient. The footprints never reappeared, but I could still feel them, trailing behind, unseen, pressing silently against the edges of my senses. I stepped onto the porch. The wood was damp beneath my feet. The fog lingered, heavy, wrapping the house in gray, hiding what might follow. I stood there alone, listening to the soft rustling of leaves. The forest seemed to whisper, holding its secret, patient and still. Even now, the memory of the prince haunts me. Fresh, cold, deliberate, leading somewhere I will never see. Into the fog, silent and waiting. Night pressed heavy against the house. The air smelled faintly of damp plaster and cold wood. Each breath I drew tasted metallic, sharp and thin. I heard it first, a murmur from the walls. Soft, almost tender, calling my name. I pressed my ear against the plaster. The cold seeped through my skin. Whispers curled around my ear, urgent now, insistent. Sentences that made no sense, yet felt like warnings. The room smelled of dust and faint mildew. The hum of the house seemed to quiet itself. Every shadow leaned closer, watching, listening. I traced the wall with my hand. The plaster was rough beneath my fingers, and the murmurs shifted with each touch. They moved along the walls, curling toward me, impossible, patient. I swallowed, my chest pressed tight. The whispers grew louder, a soft rhythm vibrating through the floorboards. Words I could not understand, but their meaning pressed deep. I stepped back. The shadows of the room stretched along the corners, longer than they should be, folding over themselves. The murmur became a hiss, like air slipping through a crack, but filled with intent. I reached for the light switch. Fingers trembling, cold sweat on my skin. The walls fell silent the moment the lamp flickered on. Hollow, empty, a quiet that pressed against my ears, thicker than the whispers. The air remained heavy, scented with dust and fear. My heartbeat was loud against the silence, each thump echoing softly through the room. I moved closer to the wall again. Even in light, the shadows seemed to twitch, folding into spaces they should not occupy. The memory of the whispers lingered, curling in the corners of my mind. I touched the plaster once more. Cold, solid, yet the memory of the sound hummed through me. Soft, urgent, patient. I breathed slowly. Every exhale carried a faint metallic tang, the scent of plaster and old wood. The room seemed still, but I knew it waited, listening for the dark to return. I left the room, closed the door behind me softly. The house seemed normal again. Yet, sometimes at night I hear it, a murmur curling through the walls. Soft at first, then urgent, calling my name. Alone, breathing, and always waiting. Dusk pressed softly over the street. The fog rolled in low, curling around the lampposts, the edges of the houses. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and cold earth. Our neighbor's dog had vanished overnight. No barking, no rustling, no sign. Only silence. I walked slowly down the street. The fog clung to my legs, cold and damp. The hush of the evening pressed against my ears. And then I saw it, shadow-like, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It wandered between the lampposts, slow, deliberate, almost floating across the pavement. I called its name softly. My breath fogged in the air. The dog paused, head tilting slightly, as if considering me. But then, a shift in the mist. A ripple of gray, and it was gone. The paw prints remained, pressed lightly into the damp earth, edges softened by the fog. They led nowhere, fading into nothing. I crouched down. Fingers brushed the cold, wet earth. The prints were fresh. The smell of damp fur lingered faintly. And yet, the dog had vanished entirely. The fog pressed closer, wrapping the street in pale gray. Shadows pooled under the trees. The hum of evening insects seemed distant, muted. I stood, listening, hoping for a rustle, a step, a whisper, but only the soft sigh of the wind. I stepped along the paw prints. They led no place, ending abruptly in the mist. The street felt empty, cold, patient. I called again. No answer. Not a bark, not a yelp, not even a shuffle. Just the lingering glow where its eyes had been. I turned back toward home. The fog seemed to press my footsteps down, softening the sound, swallowing the path behind me. The paw prints faded completely. Only memory remained. The shadow of the dog, the soft glow of its eyes, and the cold hush of the mist. I reached my porch. The air still smelled of wet leaves and earth. The quiet pressed tight. Sometimes I think I see it at the edge of the fog. A shadow pausing, watching, curious, patient, silent, and then gone again. The night pressed quiet over my childhood home. Fog curled around the porch, cold and damp. The air smelled faintly of old wood and dust, thick with the scent of empty rooms. A faint light glimmered in the attic window, pale, almost tentative, though no one had lived here in years. I froze. The shadows inside the window shifted, folding into forms that shouldn't exist. Tall, thin, fluid, bending against the corners. My heartbeat pressed to my ears. Each breath tasted metallic and cold. The wind sighed through the trees, soft against my skin, brushing hair and jacket alike. I stepped onto the porch. What groaned beneath my feet, damp from the night, the light in the attic pulsed softly, like it was aware of me. Shadows moved again, curved shapes, impossible angles, folding over one another. I blinked. When my eyes opened, the shapes vanished. The fog pressed close, curling around the porch railings. The air felt heavy, almost weighting. A soft seemed to linger, or maybe it was just my breath. I leaned closer to the window, cold glass beneath my fingertips. The room inside was empty. Still, I could feel the motion, the absence, the memory of forms that had just been there. I stepped back. The porch creaked under my weight. The fog swirled, hiding the yard, the path, the edges of the house. The light glimmered once more, then vanished entirely. The shadows gone, the attic still, silent, waiting. I stood alone. The chill pressed against my face. The smell of damp wood lingered. The memory of shapes that shouldn't exist lingered longer. The house seemed empty, yet I knew it wasn't. And somewhere in the silence, the attic waited. The house was still. Night pressed against the windows, heavy and dark. The air smelled faintly of cold wood and dust, damp and sharp. I stepped into the hallway. The temperature shifted without warning. I could see my breath curling in front of me, though every window was tightly closed. The floorboards felt cold beneath my feet. A soft hum seemed to vibrate through the walls. The air pressed against my skin, icy and deliberate. A shadow moved just beyond the doorway. Slow, patient, almost curious. I froze. The figure lingered, watching, its edges folding into the darkness. Then it shifted, dissolving, leaving only a shadow behind. The hallway seemed longer. The lamp cast pale, uneven light, stretching the shadows along the walls. The air smelled faintly metallic, like iron and winter leaves. I held my breath. The cold wrapped around me, seeping into my bones. Every footstep seemed muted, absorbed by the silence. The figure did not return, yet I could feel its presence, folding along the corners, leaning into the edges of the light. I pressed a hand to the wall. Cold, rough plaster beneath my fingers. The shadow had been there, and now it lingered in memory, curling along the hallway, patient, waiting. I stepped back. The hallway returned to silence. The cold remained, a quiet hum vibrating through the floorboards. I exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the pale light, a reminder of the chill of the unseen watcher. Alone, listening, feeling the shadows stretch, the air still humming faintly with its presence. I left the hallway, closed the door softly behind me. The house seemed normal again, yet sometimes late at night I can still see at the corner of my vision, and I know it is still there. The street was quiet. Fog curled low along the pavement, damp and thick. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and cold metal. I parked outside my friend's house. The car doors clicked softly. The fog pressed against the windshield, swirling in pale gray ribbons. Minutes later, I looked back. The car was gone. No tracks in the wet street. No sign of keys. Nothing remained but the fog and the stillness. A shadow hovered where the car had been. Dark, shapeless, leaning into the mist. It seemed aware, watching. I stepped closer. The pavement felt cold beneath my shoes. The fog brushed against my face, damp and heavy. Every breath tasted metallic, sharp and thin. I reached toward the shadow. It didn't move. It just lingered, patient, folding into the fog like it had always been there. The streetlights flickered softly. Shadows stretched along the buildings, folding over themselves, quiet and deliberate. I swallowed, the hum of the fog pressing on my ears, soft and constant, like a breath in the night. I turned, hoping to see the car again. But the space was empty. The shadow remained. A quiet presence reminded me that some things move when we aren't looking. I stepped back. The fog shifted around my legs, curling into the emptiness. The street remained silent, cold, patient. I walked toward my friend's porch. Every step felt muffled, absorbed by the dampness. The shadow lingered at the edge of my vision. I knew it would not leave, and that the empty space where my car had been was no longer just absence. I breathed slowly. The chill pressed against my chest. The fog whispered past my ears, and the shadow waited, alone, listening and watching. The playground was empty. Night pressed low, the air damp with fog and the scent of wet grass. The metal of the swings gleamed pale under the streetlight. Soft laughter drifted through the mist. High, quiet, almost melodic, yet no one was there. The swing swayed slowly. No wind stirred. Each creak whispered to the fog, hollow and deliberate. I saw them at the edges of my vision. Tiny shadows flickering, moving just out of focus. Shapes like children, but wrong. Longer limbs, faces blurred, leaning into angles that should not exist. The laughter grew, soft, teasing, echoing through the empty playground. It wrapped around the fog, curling around the swing chains, the slide, the climbing frames. My breath fog in the cold air. I swallowed, tasting damp metal and earth. Each heartbeat drummed in my chest, loud against the quiet, pressing against the silence. The shadows moved closer, folding along the edges of the equipment. The swings shivered as if touched, yet nothing passed my line of sight. I stepped back. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, muted by the fog. The air pressed tighter, damp and heavy. The laughter lingered, curling around the streetlight poles, soft, urgent, patient. I turned toward home. The mist clung to my legs, slow, cold, deliberate. The tiny shadows flickered one last time, stretching impossibly tall, before vanishing into the fog. I breathed in slowly. The playground remained still. The swing stopped, the laughter gone. Only the fog lingered, thick and silent, and the faint, uneasy memory of movement where nothing should have been. I left quickly. Each step carried me further from the fog, the metallic scent of swings fading. Yet even from the street, I could feel their gaze lingering, and hear the echo of laughter curling softly through the night. Alone, cold, and followed, the house was quiet. Night pressed heavy against the windows. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and old fabric. I walked down the hall. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, soft and deliberate. The bedroom door stood open. I had locked it hours ago. The hinges were silent, yet the gap yawned pale in the dim light. The air inside smelled faintly of smoke and soil, cold and dry, clinging to the edges of the room. It pressed against my skin, shifting with every breath I drew. A shadow lurked in the corner, long, thin, impossible. It leaned against the walls, as if waiting, patient, deliberate. I stepped closer. The carpet was damp beneath my feet, the fibers clinging to my shoes. Every heartbeat pressed in my chest, loud against the quiet. The shadow moved, slow, fluid, like smoke folding into itself. It did not flee or flee. It simply melted, evaporating into nothing before my eyes. The room smelled of absence, of something lost, of the faint tang of regret. I pressed my hand to the doorframe, cold, solid, but empty beyond it. I looked around. No shape remained. Yet I could feel the lingering weight of its presence, a memory of movement where none should be. The lamp cast pale light along the walls, stretching shadows that quivered at the edges. I breathed slowly, trying to chase away the chill that clung to my spine. The door creaked softly as I closed it behind me. The hallway returned to silence. The air was still, yet heavy. I walked away, each step deliberate and measured. The memory of the shadow pressed against the back of my mind reminded me that some doors open on their own, and some things never truly leave. Alone, cold, watching. The living room was dim. The night pressed against the windows, fog curling low along the glass. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold electronics. The television flickered. Static danced across the screen, pale and restless. It hummed softly, a low vibration that pressed through floorboards. I leaned closer. Shapes formed in the noise. Faces pressed against the dark glass, staring. Eyes wide, impossible. Mouths moving, silent, as if whispering through the static itself. The hum settled in my chest. My breath fogged in the cold air, quick, shallow. The carpet pressed damp beneath my shoes, clinging as I shuffled backward. I reached for the remote, fingers trembling, cold, the static twisted, shapes folding into one another. They lingered, like they had nowhere else to go. I switched it off. The room fell silent. The ringing in my ears pulsed, a faint, insistent reminder that they hadn't really gone. The shadows in the corners of the room shifted. The lamp cast a pale glow, long and thin across the walls. The air smelled faintly metallic, as if the electricity itself had carried something unseen. I sat down on the couch. The hum in my chest slowly faded, but the memory of the shapes remained, imprinted in the edges of my vision. I stared at the blank screen. The silence was heavy, thick and patient. The air felt watched, as though the static had followed me, lingering behind my closed eyelids. I breathed slowly. The cold pressed against my skin. The carpet clung to my feet. The room held its quiet weight, still alive with absence, alone, cold, and remembered. The backyard was shrouded in fog. Night pressed heavy against the fence, thick and cold. I heard pacing, soft, deliberate, echoing against the wood. Not quite footsteps, something longer, heavier, unseen. Shadows shifted along the fence line. Tall, too tall to be human. They moved with a strange fluidity, folding into mist, then stretching again. I called out. My voice trembled. Silence answered. It hung, thick and patient, curling around the cold, damp air. The earth smelled faintly of wet soil, a sharp, metallic tang in the night. I pressed my palm to the fence. Cold, solid yet alive with absence. One shadow lingered. Closer, darker, tilting its head toward me. A pause, as if curious or waiting. I held my breath. The fog curled around my ankles, damp and cold. The shadow remained, then dissolved into gray, folding back into nothing. The backyard returned to quiet. Only the soft hum of night, the rustle of distant leaves. The memory of the movement pressed against my chest, insistent, unshakable. I stepped back inside. The door closed behind me with a dull thud. The warmth of the house felt thin, a fragile barrier against the outside. Alone, cold, watched, and remembering. The garden was hidden behind the old stone wall. Fog clung to the ground, curling around my ankles. The air smelled damp, earthy, heavy with dew. Every leaf dripped with moisture. It glistened faintly in the pale moonlight. I stepped carefully, listening. Only the soft rustle of branches underfoot. In the corner, something crouched. Black, still, watching. I froze. My breath puffed white in the cold air. The figure didn't move, but I felt its gaze press against my skin. A shiver ran down my spine and the silence thickened. I blinked. The garden was empty. No black shape, no shadow, only the fog curling between twisted vines. Yet the feeling lingered, of eyes following, of something waiting. The path wound between overgrown bushes, wet leaves brushing my arms. The hum of night insects filled the air, but beneath it, a quiet presence hummed softly, just at the edge of hearing. I took a step forward. A branch snapped, crisp and sharp. My heart thudded. The fog seemed to deepen, swallowing the moonlight. I stopped, closed my eyes. The garden held its breath with me. Then I moved again. The dew chilled my fingers as I brushed past the bushes. The smell of damp earth and something older, something hidden, clung to the air. I glanced back. Nothing. Yet every instinct told me I wasn't alone. The black figure had vanished, but the weight of its watchfulness remained. The moon peeked through the fog, casting long, twisting shadows. The garden stretched endlessly, yet I felt confined, trapped in that stillness, under the gaze of something unseen. I took a last step toward the gate. The soft hum of the night pressed against my ears. The wet leaves whispered underfoot. And then I was out, the garden slipping behind me like a memory. Alone, cold, the sense of being watched following me long after the fog swallowed the path. The bedroom was still. Night pressed softly against the walls. The air smelled faintly of rain and cold wood. I lay awake, listening. A hum of wind against the eaves, a faint rustle from the yard. Then the window, a shadow pressed against the glass. Tall, thin, still. I blinked. Gone. The pain felt icy under my fingertips. A chill crawling up my spine, like it had lingered, even when unseen. I held my breath. Shallow, deliberate, the kind of breath that waits. Patient, yet heavy in the silence. I leaned closer. The fog outside swirled around the streetlight. Shapes twisted in it, but nothing moved except the memory of that shadow. I could almost feel it there, cold pressed to the glass, watching, shaping itself to the contours of the window. It waited, always waiting. The floor creaked beneath my weight. My own soft footsteps seemed loud, echoing in the quiet. I pulled the curtain slightly. Nothing, yet the feeling of eyes, curious and deliberate, traveled down my spine like ice water. A faint hum of night air through the sill. The scent of damp leaves drifted in. It lingered, subtle, unsettling. I tried to convince myself it was imagination. The fog, the branches, the shifting shadows. But my breath betrayed me, short, nervous, tasting of cold. The window seemed to breathe too. Or perhaps I was imagining it, the faint vibration of something unseen, pressing its presence into the room. I stepped back. The shadow was gone. Yet I swore I could hear it, shallow, deliberate breathing, synchronized with my own. I didn't sleep. The hum of the wind became a whisper. I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting, patient. Morning light would not erase it. The chill remained in the glass, in the corners of the room, in the pause between my own breaths. Even empty, even silent, the window remembered, and I remembered the shadow. The streets were swallowed in fog, thick, damp, suffocating. Every streetlight blurred into a pale halo, the air heavy with mist and the smell of wet earth. I walked quickly, shoes pressing into the slick pavement. Each step felt loud, echoing against unseen walls. The fog rolled, curling around lampposts, trees, cars. Everything familiar became strange. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, almost coaxing. My name, drawn out, gentle, like breath across glass. I paused. The fog thickened, folding over itself. Shadows moved within it. Tall, thin shapes that shouldn't exist. They shifted with the mist, gliding, observing, waiting. I shivered. The damp wrapped around my clothes. My own breath felt loud in the hollow air. Each exhale a small plume, disappearing instantly. The whispers grew, layered and overlapping. I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. I could feel them circling me, leaning close, learning me, watching from the invisible edges. I started walking faster. Soft footsteps echoed behind me. I didn't dare turn. The fog seemed to bend toward me, to fill every space around me. A branch snapped somewhere. The sound startled me, wet leaves brushing against my arms. I thought I saw a figure step from the gray, pause, tilt its head, and dissolve into the rolling haze. The streetlights flickered. The fog swallowed the light. The whispers rose again, my name repeated, curious, deliberate, patient. I could taste the damp in the air. Cold water clung to my tongue and lips. The smell of earth and decay grew stronger, like the fog carried it from some hidden corner of the world. I ran, but the whispers followed, soft and unbroken. Impossible shapes traced my path, stretching, shrinking, folding over themselves. I didn't look back. The fog thickened at every turn, pressing against my face and chest. I felt eyes everywhere, shadows brushing the edges of my vision, melting into gray, yet always present. Finally, I reached home. The door, warm beneath my fingers, felt like a thin barrier against the fog. I stepped inside. The whispers didn't stop, but the walls held them at bay. The shadows couldn't follow. I pressed my hand against the cool doorknob. The fog lingered at the edges of the windows, gray and shifting. I could still feel its weight on the street. Its eyes studying from a veil. The whispers faded slowly, but the memory remained. Soft, persistent, impossible to shake. Outside, the fog rolled on, thick and endless, and I understood it remembers me. The house was quiet. Winter light filtered through pale curtains, casting the room in soft, gray tones. The air smelled faintly of dust and damp wood. I caught it first in the bathroom mirror, a shadow, dark and formless, hovering just behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The space was empty, silent, but the reflection remained. It lingered, patient, watching, waiting. I moved to the living room. Every reflective surface, glass, polished wood, even the window, held it, behind me, hovering, shifting, impossible to define. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet. I froze, feeling the weight of its gaze, a cold pressure pressing through the air. My own breath sounded loud in the quiet, a small hum of life against its stillness. I tilted my head, trying to find edges, a form, a face. Nothing, just dark, patient presence. It lured me with each pause, each step, each blink. In the kitchen, the pale light reflected on the counter. I saw it again, looming, almost pressing forward, but melting when I turned. The smell of cold metal and wet stone filled the room. I swallowed hard. I moved slowly down the hallway. Walls faded into shadows. Each door reflected a hint of movement. I didn't dare approach too closely. The air felt thick, static, like the room itself was holding its breath. In the dining room mirror, I paused. There was again, closer this time. I could feel it stretching, testing limits. The floorboards under my shoes felt slick, moist with the chill that followed it. I whispered my own name. No answer, only silence, and the soft sense that it was learning how I reacted. I tried to leave the room. The reflection lingered, edges shifting, and my reflection moved slower than I did. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. The smell of old paper and damp carpet seemed to thicken. I reached the bedroom. The mirror caught it again. I blinked. It did not. I stepped closer. The air grew heavier, like fog settling over my chest. A faint hum vibrated under my skin. I turned fully, expecting something. Nothing. But the weight remained. Silent, patient, hovering. It was everywhere I looked, in every glance, every angle. The windows trembled slightly in the wind. I pressed my hand to the cold glass. Even outside, in the pale gray world, I felt its attention. I backed away slowly. The mirror showed only fragments now. Corners of shadows, teasing shapes that weren't solid. Yet the air felt alive with its presence. I could almost smell the faint tang of iron, like something deep and unseen, moving just beyond perception. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mirrors caught the soft folds of sheets, the curve of my shoulder, and the darkness behind it all. Always behind, learning, waiting, patient. I exhaled slowly, trying to breathe. The reflection didn't blink. The room held its quiet hum, and the shadow lingered, not cruel, not rushing, simply observing. The day faded further. Gray turned to muted blue. Even in the dim light, its shape remained, hovering, patient, silent. Always just behind me. The house was silent. Damp autumn air pressed against the windows. Fog creeping across the lawn. I walked down the hall, the floorboards creaking under my weight, and found it, a door I had never seen before. The wood was pale, edges blurred in the dim light. I reached for the handle. It was cold. I pushed it open. Inside, nothing. Empty, except for shadows pooling in the corners, dark and thick, like spilled ink. They didn't move, not at first, but I felt them watching. The air smelled of old stone and damp fabric. A faint hum seemed to vibrate under my skin. I stepped forward. The floor felt uneven, sticky with unseen moisture. Each breath I took sounded loud, echoing too long in the emptiness. I turned to leave. The door gone. The walls stretched, seamless and pale. The shadows shifted slowly, like they were amused by me. I pressed my hand against the wall. Cold, solid, unyielding. My fingertips tingled from the chill. I could feel my own pulse, rapid and shallow, as if the room measured my fear. A soft rustle moved through the corners. I tried to blink it away. The shadows lengthened, curling slightly, but always staying just out of reach. I whispered my name. The sound faded into silence, and for a moment, I thought the room might be empty. Then a faint movement in the corner. A shadow stretched toward me. Retreating when I blinked, the air grew heavier. Every breath tasted metallic, like iron and damp leaves. I hugged myself, trying to feel grounded, but the floor seemed to vibrate faintly, as if something beneath it was stirring. I walked slowly in a circle, hoping the door might reappear. The shadows followed. Not quickly, not urgently, just patient, amused. I crouched, pressing my ear to the floor. Nothing, only the distant hum, like a heartbeat too large for the room. I stood. A faint draft traced my neck, though the windows were shut. The corners flickered with movement, long, thin shapes that seemed to watch every step. I reached toward the nearest shadow. It recoiled slightly, then stretched, pooling wider in the corner. Cold seeped into my fingertips, as if the darkness was breathing. I whispered apologies, quiet, trembling. The shadows did not answer. They only shifted, stretching and curling, holding a silent judgment. Hours could have passed, or seconds. Time felt suspended, thick and heavy. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to remember the hall I had walked down just moments ago. And then I realized I could feel the rest of the house, the other rooms warm and familiar. But this one did not belong. It was a pocket, a space grown from silence and shadow. I exhaled slowly. The shadows pooled, as if settling into corners, patiently waiting for me to understand. I could not leave, and yet I could not stay. The air remained heavy, the silence thick. I stepped back, closing my eyes for a breath. When I opened them, the shadows hadn't moved. They didn't need to. The room was empty, and yet full. The forest waited, silent, shrouded in early morning fog. Mist clung to the ground, cold and damp, curling around roots and fallen leaves. I walked slowly, each step sinking slightly, mud pressing up between my toes. The air smelled of wet earth, pines, and the faint decay of leaves left to rot. Shadows moved between the trees. Not quickly, not urgently, just flowing like waves over ground, silent, patient, watching. I stopped. The fog seemed thicker here, swallowing shapes, flattening distance, making the forest feel endless. A soft rustle brushed against my arm. I thought I saw movement at the edge of my vision, dark shapes tilting their heads, studying me as if I were a lesson. I breathed, shallow and deliberate. The cold wrapped around my chest, tight and steady. Every exhale hung in the air, small clouds dissipating into nothing. I took another step. A shadow moved closer, then retreated when I blinked. They were patient, waiting to see how I would react. The mist swirled, curling around my ankles. I could feel it in the hollows of my shoes, wet and chilling, pressing against my skin. The forest was alive, not with sound, but with presence. I stopped near an ancient oak. Its bark was rough, cold under my palm. Shadows gathered in the fog beyond, forming shapes my mind could almost recognize. I wanted to call out, but no voice came. I realized then there was no escape. The forest had always been here, quietly watching, even when I thought I was alone. A soft hum rose from the fog, like static far away, like a heartbeat too deep to hear clearly. I felt it through my chest, through the soles of my feet pressed into the earth. I walked slowly again. Branches reached across the path, their tips brushing my shoulders, dew soaking my jacket. The shadows shifted, always just beyond reach. Curious, patient, silent. I paused at a clearing. The mist lay thick over the ground, and the forest seemed infinite. The shadows stretched longer, leaning closer with every heartbeat, and I understood something quiet, unspoken. I had always been alone, but never truly alone. Something moved with me, not following, not leading, simply present. I sank to the ground, fog curling around my knees, breath puffing in the icy air. The shadows leaned closer, but not threatening, just observing, patient, eternal. Time blurred. I could not tell minutes from hours. The fog, the earth, the soft movement of shapes, all seemed endless. I closed my eyes. The forest hummed quietly, shadows drifting in the corners of vision. Cold pressed against my skin. I let it in, let the silence and presence surround me. When I opened my eyes, the mist lay thick and still. Shadows flowed in the periphery, watching, curious, quietly patient. I stood slowly. The fog pressed around me, soft and unyielding. The forest exhaled with me, and I walked forward, alone and yet never truly alone.